and welcome to the Nerd Tea. I am here with my lovely guest, Terry J. Benton-Walker.
Well,
Hello, how are you
hi.
doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so
Yeah.
excited to talk to you.
Yes, I am very excited. I have been looking forward to this ever since I met you. I'm excited. Let's go.
We have to tell we met in person, and I will
Mhm.
insert a picture somewhere here. But we met in person twice, actually.
Yes, and the first time was at Bridget Kemmerer's event, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because I know you're a Bridget fan,
Oh yeah.
and also too, just like wonderful person. Bridget has always been just like so kind to me and so welcoming to me since I became an author from the very beginning. So when she asked me to host her event, I was like, absolutely, and I'm so glad I did because like we got to meet there.
Congrats.
Yeah.
Yes, I know. I was at her event because I am a fan. I don't
Hmm.
know if you can see, but that's like a shelf that has like a bunch of
Yep.
her books. You see
Hmm.
that?
Yep.
And I was at her event, and obviously, her being her, she also asked you a lot
Hmm.
of questions about your book. And the more that you talked, the more I was like, actually, though, but like that sounds legit. So I
Hmm.
ended up buying your book right there and then, and I'm so glad I did.
Thank you. I'm so glad you did too. I can't wait to talk to you about it.
Yes, and actually, this is the perfect segue. Let's have you introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit
Yeah,
about the books that you have written.
absolutely. So I am Terry J. Benton-Walker, and I am the best-selling and award-winning author of the Blood Debt series, which we're here to talk about today. And the premise for Blood Debts is I like to pitch it as a contemporary Game of Thrones featuring Black and Black queer teens set in a modern day New Orleans. So, 30 years after the most brutal, magical massacre in New Orleans history, twin heirs of a dethroned family set out to right the wrongs in their family's past and bring about the justice that they're owed. So that's just out, and Blood Justice is also out. Blood Justice just came out in paperback a few weeks ago. Um, and I am also the author of the Alex Wise series, which is a middle grade contemporary fantasy about a 12-year-old kid who goes up against the four horsemen after death possesses his 10-year-old little sister and kicks off a global apocalypse. And last but not least, I am also the editor and a contributor of the young adult horror anthology, The White Guy Dies First.
Which is such a cool name.
I love that title so much.
It's such a good name. Such a good one.
Thank
I
you.
love it. I can't wait to read that one too.
Mhm. Yes, it's you will enjoy it. Yes, because are you a horror fan?
I was actually about to ask, will I
Okay.
be scared? Because I am a scaredy cat. Like a
Mhm.
legit scare. Like I will get scared out of my own shadow.
Yeah,
So,
it probably will scare you, but I'll say this. I'll say this.
okay.
There's a wide range of horror in there. So there are some stories that are more atmospheric, that aren't scary. There are some stories that maybe are not as scary, but are more bloody and gory.
Okay.
And there are a few that are nightmare fuel. I'm sorry to tell you,
You
but
are
my story is nightmare fuel. Sorry.
I knew it. I knew it because we
Mhm.
you have talked about your love of horror.
Yeah.
And like I mean, obviously Blood Debts is not a horror story,
Hmm.
but just from the few elements in there, I can already
Yeah.
tell. Like, they're
Yeah.
terrifying.
Yeah, there's a lot of dark fantasy elements in Blood Debts,
Yeah.
especially Blood Justice. And I'm sure when you were reading Blood Justice, you could see like my love for horror. I cannot quit it, even when I'm writing fantasy. It seeps in.
Yeah, no, it was slightly terrifying, actually.
I'm so fine.
There were things that I was like, "Oh, okay, but this is perfect because we get to talk about them right now." And I love how you describe it as a like a dark fantasy, especially
Hmm.
because it's YA.
Hmm.
And so like it is so intriguing and so rich and so scary, even though it is YA. So it's like I that's one of the things I think was like so different for me for this book.
Yes, thank you. And, I consider the Blood Debt series to be upper A, and there's a lot of adult crossover appeal too. But that's the thing that I love about writing upper YA is you get a chance to be a little bit dark, and be a little more real. And kids love that, especially too, because they want stories that are real, that don't pull punches, that like tell things like they are. And even better when you can apply it to a fantastical setting and apply it.
Yeah, and obviously because it is contemporary fantasy, there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of you weaving in magic into like the real life things that
Mm-hmm.
people can connect with. And we're
Yep.
gonna get to a lot more about that. But first, I want to talk about you mentioned them already, but your main characters are twins,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that they're twins, but they're so different,
Yes.
so incredibly different, and they obviously have gone through very similar in the first book. They've gone through similar traumatic experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
But obviously the way that they deal with it is completely different. So can you please talk to me about your amazing main characters?
Of course, yes. That's Chris and Clem, who are the heroine and the hero, respectively, of this series. And um, I ever since like this book has gone through several different iterations, but always from the beginning, Chris and Clem were always there, and the story always centered around them. And I, first of all, them being twins and the brother sister relationship came out of my longing to have a sibling like close in age to me, because I always wondered what that would be like. Because I do have siblings. I have a younger brother and a younger sister, but my brother is 10 years younger than me, and my sister is 15 years younger than me, and I'm the oldest. So when we were younger together, all in the same house, we were so far apart that we didn't really get along. All we did was fight. So
I
yes,
get
I was
that.
like, yeah, I was like, it would be cool to have someone who's closer to my age that like gets me and understands like where I'm coming from and what I'm going through. So I put a lot of longing for that into the relationship between Chris and Clem, but also too, I do realize that siblings who grow up in the same house, especially siblings who have two very strong personalities, aren't going to always get along. And they're going to misunderstand each other. They're going to misinterpret what the other person is feeling and thinking. And that's going to lead to friction. And I had a lot of fun in Blood Debts exploring the relationship between Chris and Clem and showing the ways in which they were similar in terms of just like their tenacity and their willingness to like fight for justice and to do what's right. Even though they might go about it in a different way, at the core, they share those same principles too. But when it comes to just like even down to when they walk into a room, like they notice things differently. So when Chris walks into a room, the first thing that she notices is like what's in the room, who's in the room, what's going on. Like she's very analytical. Versus when Clem walks into a room, he notices less of what's there, but more of like how it makes him feel. Because
Yeah.
he's a very emotional person and a very emotional character. And because of those differences in who they are, like they also have misperceptions on the other person. So at the beginning of Blood Debts, Chris is kind of frustrated with Clem because their mother is sick and she's been having to take on so much responsibility at home for caring for her mother and the house and everything. And she feels like Clem is just such a carefree spirit and he's just living his life without a care in the world. And it's like, no, mama, like he's like very depressed. like he's coping because he doesn't know how to, deal with things or face things head on the way that you do. And then alternatively, Clem is frustrated with Chris because he's like, man, all this stuff is going on, and she just acts like nothing bothers her, and she just soldiers through, and she just fixes it, and she handles stuff, and like I'm over here, like I'm depressed, and I'm sad, I'm going through all this stuff, and I can't go on. Um, and they through their journey, they learn how to like communicate and talk to each other and support each other, and then they learn, you know, that perhaps the things that they thought about the other person wasn't really correct. And the only way to get to correct is to actually talk and be nurturing and be involved and engaged.
That is one of the things that I found super interesting about how you were writing them, because I could tell right away,
Hmm.
like, obviously at the top of each of the chapters you would say whose point of view we were in, but if I ever forgot to check for whatever reason, I always knew whose
Hmm.
side I was in. Like, it
Hmm.
was always very clear to me, like, who is head, because you're right, like, now that
Hmm.
you pointed it out that way, you're right, like, the way the Clem was always a lot more, I related a lot to him, because
Hmm.
it's very much like, oh, like, they feel like they're mad, and like, why are they like like that way, and like, I'm feeling really like weird vibes right now, like, and
Hmm.
I matched that a lot.
Yes, same.
Yeah, literally, I know
Hmm.
so many people like Chris, and we love them, but
Hmm.
like, I cannot be,
Hmm.
that is not me.
Uh, yeah, I think so there's a little bit of me in every character, but I think there's the most of me in Clem.
Yeah,
And I identify with Chris a lot, but I do identify with Clem the most out of everyone.
I think Chris for me is like the person who, when if you ever get me to a point where I'm like angry or
Hmm.
frustrated, that is who is in my head a lot. Like,
Hmm.
you know what I mean? Like I might not show
Hmm.
it, but I'm like Chris in my head, you
Hmm.
know?
Yes.
But but otherwise
Hmm.
I'm very Clem. Like,
Hmm.
that
Yes.
vibe. Yeah. And actually, so I want to talk to you a lot about, you have like really good themes happening
Thank you.
in your
Hmm.
books. And so I want to talk about some of them. I want to start off with the theme of generational trauma, which I think is
Hmm.
probably the strongest one that you have throughout, so far, the two books that have been out. Um,
Hmm.
what I find really interesting about it is really what happens when, like you were saying, when they don't communicate with one another, and
Hmm.
how people misinterpret certain things and certain actions, and how that really does affect generation after generation and after
Hmm.
generation. So I want you to sort of talk a little bit about the generational trauma in your books, and why that was something that you wanted to explore.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's a heavy
I-
subject.
it is, and I have a lot to say.
Okay.
I'm just thinking how to phrase it. Um, Blood Debts is a very personal um, story. It's a very personal project. And I specifically wrote or created this world, and I wrote this story for Black and Black queer people primarily. And I wanted to tell a story that, while real and relatable, um, still touches on something positive that I want us as a community to take from my experiences and everything that I have learned the hard way through my life. And because I put a lot of my own experiences and knowledge and wisdom into the stories that I write. And the theme, one of those themes being generational trauma, and how, if we're not conscious of that, we will pass that down to the generations after us. And it's very easy to pass down your traumas, and it's very hard to heal and address your triggers and, you know, your past and your family's past. And but the only way to a brighter future for everyone collectively is if we all do that. And it is very, very hard to do. Um, and where that shows up in this series is everybody's trauma and the things that have happened to us prior have kind of shaped community and the world, and even like the perception of communities. And that external pressure has sort of changed people which has in turn changed how they parent, which in turn has kind of altered how these young people have grown up and developed. So even though certain characters are villains, like Valentina, Zach, Oz, I wrote it in such a way that you can even see how the generational trauma and the stuff from years ago has just rolled downhill and has affected them too. Because even though they're villains, they're still a part of the community and they're still somewhat products of their environment. And so often when I'm writing them, I wonder to myself, how different would these kids have turned out if they had a different home life or if they had different parents? They were raised differently and they were nurtured instead of abandoned or abused, right? And that's and so it's one of those things where no definitive answer, right? So I'm not proposing questions with any of my work that has an answer, but the purpose of it is to make you think about that stuff and in turn apply it to how we go about our everyday lives and think about trauma in our own life and like how we're absorbing that and how we're passing that on.
I was gonna ask about that a little bit later, but I'll ask you now because that is something else that I really enjoyed is that you have so many characters that are doing certain things that are that are at a base level not good.
Yeah.
Right? Even our heroes are doing something that you're like,
Yeah.
calm down. Um Not that's villainous stuff. Like, is
Mhm.
this your villain origin story? Like, I cannot tell. Um, but and so you did make me question a lot of times. There were times when I was reading certain people's point of view, like Valentina, for example, and I would be like, I hate this girl. Like, there's nothing this man can write that I will ever like her. Like, I don't think so. And then other times when I was like, damn, yeah, no, I feel bad. Dang it. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. So
I
even at the end of Blood Justice, so how did you feel about Valentina at the end of Blood Justice? You can be honest.
I will say like Blood Justice, Blood Dip. The entire time I was hating her. I was like, I can
Yeah.
see where you're
Mhm.
traumatized, but I don't care. Like you're
Yes.
making your trauma other people's business, and I've always, that's a personality trait that I cannot stand
Hmm.
personally.
Yes.
Um, Throughout Blood Justice was when I was like, I would waver at
Hmm.
times, because I'm like, I understand her trauma. I understand where she needs healing. I can also see
Hmm.
she's so smart, and that's amazing. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
like, but at the same time, I'm like, you're still, you are so smart, but you are choosing to take that and
Hmm.
apply it and continue that, like
Hmm.
that line.
Yeah, and that's even related to what we were talking about with generational trauma and
Yeah.
passing that on to, and which is also related to the cycle of violence as well, because that's something that gets passed down from generation to generation, right? And I had a lot of fun in Blood Justice, like playing with the similarities between Valentina and Chris,
Yes.
because Valentina is Chris's series villain. Like
Yeah.
that is the person she is going to have to face off at the very end before she will ever know peace. And it's sad in a way, right?
Yeah.
Because together they could do so much more,
And so,
right? If they could, yeah, if they could just work together.
mhm.
And like this whole series, I want to be kind of a cautionary tale
Yeah.
about what could potentially happen if we don't do the work to stop these toxic cycles in our communities, right? And so, and even in Blood Justice, Chris tries to find peace with
Yeah.
Valentina and to move on, but Valentina just won't let it go. And it's sad, right? Because, and like this is not spoilery, but just like some stuff from Blood Justice is, for example, when Valentina was later on in Blood Justice, when she's FaceTiming with her cousins in California, and they're telling her about like them putting together the Latin festival at their school, and Valentina is kind of like thinking about that, kind of whimsically, like wishing, like she could be involved or whatever. And I'm like, but you know someone who just put together a festival in your hometown. So like if y'all were cool, you could say like, hey, let me connect you with my friend Chris because she just did this and we could do it together. But no, because y'all beefing.
Good, yeah. And the worst part about it is that their issues with each other, A, has nothing to do with them,
Mhm.
and B, really has nothing to do with them, because even the stuff that started the outside of their family over this boy kid that I won't spoil, but you know who I'm talking
Mhm.
about,
Mhm.
really had nothing to, like, it wasn't their fault at all. And
Yeah.
so it's really, and I think what's so sad is that they each have all the information they need to make another decision, and they won't.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and that is so upsetting. So that's why with Blood Justice, you did pull at my heartstrings with Valentina.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
ultimately, I was just like, yeah, no, but you're still choosing it. Like, when you were
Mhm.
ignorant, it's one thing, but now you know, and
Mhm.
now you're choosing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I'm sorry to tell you, but
Oh
the
no.
bad decisions are not gonna stop.
There,
We're gonna
yeah.
yeah, we're gonna ride that train right until the very end of the series. And then like of course hindsight is 2020. So like then they're gonna be like, oh well this could have been a lot easier. But you
Yeah.
know. But like I said, it's a cautionary tale. So you see what happens when you don't do these things. So maybe you will end it saying like maybe I should do better.
Yeah. Honestly, Sophia was the only person at the end of the series that I was like, man,
So tell me more. What do you think about Sophia?
I liked her. I
Yeah.
I did. Why are you looking at me like that? Wait, I
No, I'm just,
hold on.
no, it's like it's genuine curiosity. Like I just
Okay.
because actually like a lot of people don't have opinions about Sophia, so I'm genuinely interested like
Oh,
what
I
you
have
think
a
about
lot
her.
of
Yeah,
opinions of her. No, I do. I so
and not to get you off topic too. Like don't let me
no, no.
commandeer the show. Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, by the way, Chris, Valentina, and Sofia were all friends, and they obviously have a
Mhm.
falling out. But Valentina and Sofia stay friends, and so the way that I see Sofia is somebody who feels inadequate all the time. Like everywhere around her, she feels inadequate. She feels inadequate as a daughter. She feels inadequate as a friend.
Mhm.
She feels inadequate as a magic like person user.
Mhm.
And so I think that she is somebody who did the opposite of Valentina. She was presented with information, and she was growing, and I feel like she was failed, you know.
Mhm.
And I feel like that is something, I don't know if it's true, but that I think that's something that's gonna bite the person who failed her in the butt. um, because I saw that change, and I that is somebody that I can respect, who like had that change.
Mhm.
But then obviously, if you fail that person, then like what happens next is, what happens
Mhm.
next. Who the heck knows? Only you. But
Yeah.
I really liked her. I really felt for her. I
Mhm.
really felt like she was somebody who was not encouraged to be a strong person, but she made a
Mhm.
decision, like a very tough decision, and it bit her in the butt, even though it was the right one. And
Mhm.
that's like, yeah. So I like her a lot.
Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you for sharing that with me. That's very good to know. I like Sophia too,
Yeah.
and Sophia definitely has a much larger role to play in the overall story. And what happened to her at the end of Blood Justice is definitely going to be a catalyst for what you see from her in the future. And also too, like we were talking about generational trauma. And even Sophia's been affected by that because, and this is not a spoiler, Sophia is shunned. She does not have generational magic. However, there is spirit work and
Yeah.
divination are a branch of magic which was disavowed after the War of the Moons. And if you read Blood Justice, you will hear all the details about that. But it's like spirit work and divination was, it's like that particular branch of magic, people did a lot of work to tarnish the reputation and make it less than what it really was for very nefarious reasons, right? And because that is a practice for mostly black and brown people, that was an incredible act of just like trauma that like got passed down for generations, right? And so here we have Sophia generations later who has this power, but she thinks that she's not connected to her generational magic, but you really are. The only reason you think that you're not is because of the trauma of some bullshit that happened like 200 years ago,
This is why I
right?
feel for girl. Like I feel like this is
Mhm.
why. Like that was my favorite character of like
Yeah.
the entire Blood Justice. Like she was my favorite character. Like
Yes.
she was.
That's good to know. I would definitely have you in mind when I'm writing future books in the series.
Okay, good. Yes, please. I just want good things for her. I want flowers and rainbows and sunshine.
Mhm.
Like really. And it actually leads me perfectly to the other theme that you have a lot in this book, which is racism combined with a corrupt system and abuse of power, because it all goes very much hand in hand.
Mhm.
And I felt that frustration um, throughout the entire time that I was reading the two books. Like I felt
Mhm.
that like that silly little thing of like, why can't you all just get along? Like, and I
Mhm.
wish it was so simple, but it's yeah, I was frustrated every single time. I was like, stop being so racist. So
Yes.
yeah, it made it even more so.
Mhm.
So I want you to sort of talk about weaving in, because you did that a lot, especially because your books are set in New Orleans, weaving
Mhm.
in that real life history, real life experiences, a real life erasure of histories
Mhm.
into this with magic instead.
Mhm. Yes. So with contemporary stories featuring Black people, people of color in general, but specifically Black people
Mhm.
in this case, I feel as if you can't tell an authentic story if you don't include, it's like what it's like to be a black person in a contemporary society where you're constantly judged by the color of your skin. Also, too, not only that, but like the system has been designed to make your life harder, right? And I felt like, because I said earlier, I wrote this series for Black and Black queer people. And while I do think that we need escapist fantasy that, like, where we get to see worlds where racism doesn't exist, I do agree that those stories should exist, and I love those stories. I'm writing one. But also, too, with this contemporary story, like, I feel like I have to meet the moment and be authentic. And this gives me a fantasy lens to be able to talk about issues that are very personal to me and my community that I care about in a way that can still be entertaining and instructive, but not overwhelming. And while these characters do have to deal with racism and systemic oppression, that is not the core of the story. And while there are evil white people in this series who do racist things. That is not the central focus or the core of this story. At its core, this is a story that is encapsulated within the black and brown community, the magical community.
Yeah.
And we have to talk about those forces because those are external forces that bring pressure and danger on us. But at its core, like this is our story, right? And that is also why I built the magic system around culture because that gave me such a rich tapestry to pull threads from everywhere, right? Because there's so much that we can talk about. Um, Even from the standpoint of cultural appropriation with non-black and brown people practicing moon magic, because like it's not illegal, it's not necessarily wrong for someone to not practice that, but you it makes you question, well, where do we draw the line when the black and brown people who get to practice their own cultural magic are um, oppressed and unfairly targeted because like they're practicing white culture, right? On top of the fact that disavowing branches of magic to make the moon magic practitioners weaker is also a form of systemic oppression and withholding knowledge. And it's related to it's like real world issues that we see now with, not wanting to teach Black history and not wanting to teach the truth about slavery and colonization and all that stuff. Like withholding that information is damaging to communities and it's dangerous. And it was important for me if I was going to tell a contemporary story that is centered in Blackness that I approach that. Not only that I approach it, but I take a lot of care in how I approach it because while I do want those things to be clear and present, I want to present people of color with a story that at the end of the day is still hopeful. You know, like a lot of wild shit happens, a lot of people die. But
That's an
when you get to the
understatement.
end of this, right? But when you get to the end of this series and you get to the end and you close the book and there's no more blood deaths, that story is done. I want you to ultimately feel a sense of hope because you got to go back out into the world and you have to face all of the stuff that we have to face. And we don't have magic like Chris or Clem to take control of the situation. And that's why these stories are cathartic for us because they give us a vision of a super powered version of ourselves where people have the power and the autonomy to like take back control of their lives, right? And so that's a little depressing when you finish that. So that's why I want that story to end on a message of hope. And hopefully it will leave you full enough when you go out into the world. You feel a little bit stronger and a little bit more prepared to fight and fight for yourself and your communities.
Yeah, I also even throughout the crazy things that would happen in the books, you did in a lot of instances take the time to do like the little things, like people cooking their grandparents' recipes, going
Mm-hmm.
to the same black owned hair salon to do your
Mm-hmm.
hair. Just like you took the time to do like those little
Mm-hmm.
moments that I think not only enriched the story but did sort of calm it down amongst all the crazy that was happening.
Yes.
I do appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. And like that's it because we need balance, right? Because that's important for us to have those quiet moments and to acknowledge those quiet, like humanizing moments, right? And that like supports the central message too of like, community and like perpetuating these endless cycles, right? Because and Marie has this conversation with Chris in Blood Justice, and I don't always agree with Marie until she said, but it's something to think about, right? Because when we're getting justice, and we might be getting justice from people in our own communities, and if we're anytime that you do something where you get vengeance or you spill blood, somebody is affected, no matter how bad the person is that you're taking out. So, like, you're going to hurt someone.
Yeah.
And that's something that you have to think about because while it may be true that you cannot shine without casting shadows, you should still also be cognizant of who you're casting a shadow on.
Yeah. And actually that leads me to the topic of vengeance, which was Obviously they're in Blood Debts, but really in Blood Justice.
Okay.
No spoilers, but just know. And I did actually have to think about this one for a while, and I have no answer. But I loved a certain character's like journey through that because
Mhm.
that frustration of yes, being peaceful is good because it gives a good image and like that's what you're trying to
Mhm.
show that you're just as good as of a person and blah blah. But then on the other hand it's like, but why can't we meet like violence with
Mhm.
violence? And I actually have a quote that I want to read back to you as though you didn't write it. So Chris is talking to a person, I won't say who because this is a spoiler, but it happens very early on in the series.
Mhm.
But she says something to this unnamed person. This unnamed person says, "This isn't you. You are nice." And she says, "Was." I correct him. This is in page 22 of the paperback version of Blood Justice. "Was." I correct him. "Abusers like you require niceness from their victims, a never ending turning of cheeks, because that makes it easier for y'all to keep doing what y'all do best, exploiting and destroying. But you don't get to do that anymore, person. A nice person was never going to stop you, but I am now." And I think about that a lot because like both are true. Having like a peaceful way works, but also allows people to get away with things because they're counting on you to be too polite, too nice, too this,
Mhm.
too that, to do anything. So I thought that was such a nice question that you were posing with these
Mhm.
characters.
Thank you. And I'm glad that you pulled out that specific quote and that resonated with you because that perfectly signifies the journey that Chris is getting ready to go on.
Mhm.
And non-spoilery, but Chris's journey in Blood Justice is a journey of vengeance.
Mhm.
And at the end of Blood Debts, like they achieved what they set out to achieve. I read Blood Debts, but at the beginning of Blood Justice, like Chris still isn't satisfied because she just can't do the radical acceptance thing and just accept that people who very boldly like assaulted her family, her community, and just like are continuing to do it and will never see justice, will never see a repercussion. And even when she tries to just forget about it and just say, like, I'm gonna put it behind me, I'm gonna keep moving, she's not allowed to. It's like people just keep putting it in her face, and she's like, "Fine, if this is what we're doing. Let's go." Right?
Literally, she's like,
And
"Oh, bet."
I'm like, "Yeah." And I think about that as a person of color too, right? Because like people love to say, "Oh, everything is not about race," right? Why do you always make it about race? And it's like because I don't have a choice,
Mhm.
right? It's like I every day I walk out of my house not expecting to be like to have to get into a fight with a racist person or to get called out of my name. Like I know at a base level that it's out there, not to be shocked, when it happens. But like I do a reasonable good job of just like focusing on my day and not thinking about that. But I'm not allowed to because it's always in my face, no matter what's happening. Right? Like if I walk into a store and I'm getting watched by security or somebody's following me around. Or even if I walk into another store and then a white lady walks up to me and asks me, "Do I work there?" And I'm not even remotely dressed like one of the employees.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like it's little microaggressions
Yeah.
like that build up that you keep having to face even when you don't want to. So it's like we don't trust me, we don't want it to always be about race, but like give us no choice.
Yeah.
And that's where Chris is at in Blood Justice. And she's like, I don't want to think about the fact that our magical community is oppressed and these redeemers are out here, like protesting and trying to take away our right to practice magic that's like been in our culture for centuries. And she's like, you know what? We're just gonna do a little festival. It's gonna, you know, we're gonna promote inter-community cooperation.
Yeah.
And they put together this nice thing, and it just gets shitted on by like these racist people. And she's just like, so what? So what are we gonna do? Because like we can't exist like this.
Hmm.
Every time we try to do something, like it gets blown up, or like torn apart or disrupted. Um, and at what point do they? Okay, like I'm about to get my lick back,
Yeah.
so you won't stop.
No, honestly, and I think that is why I did I a good person like myself shouldn't say that I was rooting for her, but I was rooting for her. Like, you know what I mean? Because I get like I mean I don't get it, but I get it. Because how much shit can you take? Truly. And like why is it that it's only the people who are the victims getting like the consequences,
Exactly.
anybody else? And so I totally
Mhm.
understood. And I loved her journey. I thought that was such a
Mhm.
good. I loved I loved that she was saying and doing the quiet things out loud.
Yeah, yeah, and that's Chris's character. That's how she is. Like she from page one that
Yeah.
Chris always did 10 toes down in her business.
Yes.
So, um,
And
and
she's
also
been through
too,
some dark stuff.
yeah,
Very
yeah.
dark
So
stuff.
she could have done a lot worse.
Yeah.
Like,
Truly,
and
honestly,
uh-huh,
she could have done a lot worse because
hmm
the people that were really doing some really horrible things were literally getting away with it.
hmm
Like, and not just like
yeah,
from her family, like her specifically.
hmm
So,
exactly. And I'm a firm believer that the only mistake that Christina Seraphine Trudeau made was in chapter one of Blood Justice. Um, that's all I'm going to say. But what I will say on that topic is I wanted to be really deliberate and nuanced with Chris's journey in Blood Justice because it was very important for me. Because it was more than just a story of vengeance or revenge. Um, Chris is a black girl who is growing into a black woman. And historically, black women have had to carry the most, have had to be responsible for the most, and have gotten the least amount of respect and grace and consideration. And there is something in the opening of Chris's chapter one. She opens Blood Justice, where it was important for me to include that because she's talking about all the stuff that happened to her, and she's talking about therapy and radical acceptance. And she, at one point, she accepted it. And she was like, I can't change anything. I'm going to let it go. And then she thought about it. And she was like, I changed my mind.
mhm.
And I feel like that's really important, specifically for Black women to know that it's okay for you to change your mind. You don't have to be okay with bullshit that people do to you, right? And what I love on Chris's journey is she's constantly like it builds. And throughout, like she's never just doing stuff for shock value. There's always a very deliberate, significant purpose behind everything that she does. And as she's experiencing these things, she's shifting her mindset and she's growing and she's learning and she's developing and she's changing. She's like forming her belief system in real time and challenging the stuff that like she's been taught and the stuff that's been handed down to her. And I really, really hope that people in general, but especially Black women get that from her story, because like that's how we should be living and that's what we should be doing. Of course, like don't start killing people. Like that was not. Like, I'm not advocating for that, but just like
On the line somewhere.
yeah, yeah. But like living your life unapologetically,
Yeah.
changing your mind, getting mad when you
Yeah.
should get mad. Like
Yeah.
not
I love that
taking
he was getting
bullshit.
mad because
You
especially it is a a stereotype, the whole
know.
like angry black woman thing, you
Hmm.
know. So I love that that she was allowing herself to be justifiably angry, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I'm only an angry black woman when you fuck with me. So if you don't want me to be an angry black woman, then how about leave me alone?
Yeah, you know, like I'm actually very peaceful.
You're right.
Like
Yeah, I'm a lot of fun if you just relax.
if you just leave me alone. So I felt originally, but I don't think this is the case.
Mhm.
Originally, I felt like Clem had like this master plan, but I don't know if he like if he has this master plan of, or if he was just feeling so vulnerable, you know?
Mhm.
Like
No, master plan.
he just was
It,
feeling so vulnerable. He's best.
mhm. Yeah, it's I purposely um curated his story that way. So we start out, and so over the series arc, like Clem's trajectory is kind of like this, and so he's heading to the bottom
Yeah.
of that arc, and this is the depressed place for him. And at the beginning of Blood Justice, like his arc is supposed to represent gay men of color and how we have so many external forces on us, and sometimes we get into a toxic cycle of like self punishment to like we have to like go through this alone and we got to figure it out, and like the bad things that happen to us is just like the retribution or whatever, and like we'll be all right. And like he gets to a point where like like that's going great at first, and like he feels the intrinsic reward of doing something really, really hard and making it happen, but he burns himself out.
Yeah.
And then he starts to ask for help, but watch repeatedly as he asks person after person after person, and
Yeah.
nobody helps him. So, and I did that on purpose.
The sad part about that
Mm-hmm.
storyline is that he didn't lack people that wanted to help him.
Mm-hmm.
He has plenty of people that are in his corner.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in that state, and like I said, I relate a lot to Clem. um,
Mm-hmm.
when you're at that point, it doesn't, if it doesn't look like a hand, you might miss the rope, you
Yeah.
know? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's where he is.
It is. And inevitably, like, we were going to end up here, right? And I thought a lot about it, and because like Clem's story and his arc of going to this, doing what he thinks is right, trying to find happiness, and ultimately ending up into this just very dark, depressed place is the story of so many gay men,
Yeah.
and it's it's important to me to be able to write that story for him and to also like write him out of it. And even though he's in the worst possible place right now, I do have a plan for him to be okay.
Yeah. Okay,
It's
good.
gonna be a long road, but he's gonna be okay.
Yeah. I know when you said earlier that like you're like you want to leave with readers with hope. I was like, "Oh, thank God." Because you're like because you do describe this as a Game of Thrones type,
Yeah.
and I understood that you meant more because of the political strife, but I was like, he better not dang well mean Game of
Yeah.
Thrones. Like,
I'm not planning a red wedding.
okay, I was like, let's not go there exactly.
Yeah, we might blow up the Step to Baylor.
Fine, that's fine. That's fine. That's totally fine. Yeah, so I really yeah, I loved their journey and I loved how different her and Clem's journey is. which actually is a perfect lead way into. I want to talk about your writing. I thought, first of all, can I just say, like, your writing is so rich and you do such a good job at nuanced emotions. And I really enjoyed reading very nuanced emotions, both from like Chris and Clem, whose head we were in, but also even when we weren't reading from their point of view, we got to see other people interact with them and just like how nobody was all good, nobody was all bad. Like
Hmm.
I just like I commend your writing in that. It's very enjoyable to read.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love hearing that. That's like the highest compliment an author could get. But I, emotion is very important to me for a number of reasons. One, because I'm a double Pisces. I'm a Pisces moon and rising. So I'm a Taurus sun, Pisces moon and rising. So I'm like double the emotion, double the fun. So of course, like I'm super into with my emotions, but also too, as a child, I had to like constantly emotionally monitor the adults around me to
Yeah.
be able to predict when the space is about to not be safe. So in turn, like that grew up in me, and I'm constantly paying attention to other people and behavior. And I'm a bit of a method writer, so I put myself in the shoes of every single character that I write, and I write from their perspective as if I'm experiencing what they're experiencing. I'm feeling what they're feeling. And so I'm glad to know that that comes through.
Yes, I mean,
And thank you.
absolutely. Like I said earlier, sometimes I would accidentally not read whose like chapter I was reading, but
Mhm.
I knew who it was like very right away,
But chuckle emotion.
because that's how much you made it so that it was very clear whose head
Hmm.
we were in. I know a little bit about your process because you have talked to me about it before, but I want everyone
Hmm.
else. You have a very interesting process of, first of all, your research, planning, and then how you actually write.
Hmm.
So please tell people your madness.
Yeah, so I am a super duper planner. I have to plan out every single detail before I draft a single word. And for a fantasy story, I'll start with a concept and I will start building the world from that concept. And I build what's called like a world building master document. And that's where I put all of the information about the world, the history, the backstory of the characters, the magic system, and details about how it worked. And I did that for the Blood Dead series. So I actually have two documents. I have one that is all about the magic systems and like the history of the different magic systems and the history of the War of the Moons and how we got mask and the generational magic council, all of that stuff. And then I have a separate document that is typically just for the characters, and I have a detailed timeline of when people were born, when people died, when people got married, when important stuff before the opening of Blood Debts happened. And then I have like all of the backstory of just like the different beefs between the different groups of people and what happened. Because I had to kind of tell myself that story so I would be able to go into it knowing previously like what happened and how everybody feels about everything and where we are at the start of that story. So I started with that, and then from there I do like plot mapping. So I would do like remember when we were in we did this in like middle school and elementary school too when we were taking English class and we were doing creative writing. We had to come up with a story idea, and you would start like a central bubble, and then like you just draw bubbles of things that are related. So I do that with every book, and that's how I come up with all the different interesting plot points and how things are related to like what I want to happen in that story. So I did that first, and with Blood Justice, because we have so many different POVs, and like by then the story is getting kind of complicated because people are doing different things, and so I actually created swim lane charts. So every character gets a lane, and like I write the important like high level plot points. of what happens in their story over the course of the book. And then I show, like, I draw little spaghetti lines to show, like, how the different decisions and stuff affects,
Oh
like,
my
other
god.
characters' plot thread. And then I put all of the high level plot points in chronological order in a Word document, and that becomes the foundation for my outline. And then I will divide that up into chapters and then add detail. And I have an outline for all of the different, from start to finish chronologically. But there's different stuff from different characters like interspersed throughout. So I already know like how the makeup is going to be, but I've not written anything yet. So once I'm done with the detailed outline, then I start drafting. And when I draft one character at a time from start to finish.
That's so wild.
Um, and I typically, for this series, I start with Valentina because she is the most fun to write. It's always super easy for me to just like drop into her POV. So I start with her, and then I finish her, and then I go back to the beginning and I start with Nick because he's the next one because he's just so unhinged. Like I just get to
Yes.
completely let loose and do him, and then I will do like the interstitials, like the newspaper clippings, and then I will do any like additional because sometimes we will get additional POVs from like other characters, so I'll do those, and then I do Chris, and then I say Clem for last. And after I'm done with everybody, I like Frankenstein it back together. And I don't read the full manuscript from start to finish until I've written everyone's individual parts. And then once I put it all back together, then I read it from start to finish and just see how everything fits together. But the reason that I drafted that way is so I can keep the voice and the plot thread for each character consistent throughout because I try to, and that's the hard thing about writing a multiple POV book is every single character has to feel unique and they have to like their arc has to feel complete. It has to have a beginning, middle, and an end. And you don't have a lot of page time, so it's almost like the more POV characters you have, you're like writing like 4 or 5 individual books. So that's a lot to juggle. So that's why I do it that way.
I mean, it's madness, but no, but it does feel that way. It does feel like you could easily just cut one POV and you still have one whole book, you
Mhm.
know? Which is crazy. I mean, don't do that. But that is how it feels, which is insane that you have like it's insane. I know when I heard that you wrote from start to finish, I was like, "What?" Like that's wild. Um I actually want to like know a little bit more. You touched on it about your magic system research because I feel like you definitely
Yeah.
in the best way grabbed bits and pieces of like the magic that we know. Uh,
Mhm.
and I've been to New Orleans, so I've done the like 1,000 tours on like voodoo and this and that because it's so
Mhm.
interesting. And so I love how you took bits and pieces of the magic that we know, and then added added little bits and created different types of magic. So can you tell me about like how
Mhm.
you were deciding what kind of magic from outside in the world to include here? Like how was
Mhm.
that process?
Yeah, so the very first draft of this book, the magic system was a lot simpler. It was just voodoo.
Mm,
Um, and when I signed with my agent and she read that book, it was called Queen at the time. It's Blood Debts now, but originally it was Queen. And she read it and she suggested that I come up with my own magic system. She said it can be inspired by voodoo, but I think you should have something creative that you come up with. And that was when, so like I took it back to the drawing board and I wiped the slate clean. And that's when I came up with the system that is centered around the celestial bodies of the sun, the moon, and the stars. And that's when I applied the culture to it and the different branches. And that came from me doing a lot of research about voodoo and hoodoo. And I learned so much that I didn't know. And coincidentally, I was also on a spiritual journey at the time. And what I found most interesting about voodoo and hoodoo was the religious this aspect of it, right? And I grew up Christian, started out Baptist, and then we went non-denominational, and in church we learned that like witchcraft is bad and you shouldn't do that. And I always remember questioning why, because there's witchcraft in the Bible. So I was like, does it just matter who does the witchcraft? So, um, as I was doing research and I was finding out about voodoo and hoodoo, I just started questioning things and unpacking that. And I started like doing my own research and like talking to people. And the one thing that I found that was interesting was the concept of God's justice and justice um, from religions like voodoo and hoodoo and like religions that originate from where we originally came from. And I thought it was very interesting that that was taken from us and we were told that it was bad. And we were given a religion where it's ideal for us to be docile and to give vengeance to the Lord and give just like let him get justice no matter what anybody does to you. And I was like, that feels kind of convenient, right? And so like I built that into blood debts
Yeah.
and the history of that world, right? So a lot of the history of that world, because it is a contemporary story. So a lot of our history mirrors the history in that story world, except during the American Civil War in that world, there's also the War of Moons going on, and there's a similar fight between the magical communities because enslaved Black people and Brown people were using moon magic to fight for their freedom.
Yeah.
And the light magic practitioners and some of the vamps who are mostly white folks, reckoned by that, and they didn't want that to happen, right? And so, like it was, it like a lot of my research that I did like colored how I told the story and how I built the magic system, and not even just from that standpoint too. Like even when I was doing research on other branches of magic and like Wiccan, and I did research about like Agnes. I believe it's Sampson. Is it Agnes Sampson or Agnes Simpson? Because like there's an Agnes in that we had to change her name. I can't remember which one is like the actual name, but like the Agnes. So in the scene in Blood Justice, so if you're watching this, it's not spoiling, but in the scene, you're going to get to see a mask meeting, which is the Magical and Spiritual Coalition. And Madeline Delacourt, who is the cardinal of the White Mages, is there. And she talks about this lady, Agnes Simpson, in the book, but I think in real life, her name is Agnes Sampson. And
I remember that scene. Yeah.
yeah, so like that came from my research.
Mhm.
So like I had researched and I found out that like she was a practicing witch, and I think it was Henry the Eighth or the Seventh or whatever that started the crusade for the witches. Like
Mhm.
they actually went after her, and like she disappeared, and like we don't like they don't know what happened to her, um and I thought about that from the standpoint of Matt Delacourt even as a villain who is a white feminist, and just how like that history would translate into her belief system and how she rules and how she wields power. Because you even have, because like that even allowed me to get into the conflict between Madeline and Winnie, who
Yeah.
is the trans cardinal mage in Europe. And like Winnie and Madeline have beef because Madeline, like Loki, thinks that Winnie shouldn't be in her position because Winnie is trans. And so like it's that research allowed just opened up the possibility so much for me to explore so many just like real things that we deal with in our communities today, but from a fantastical setting.
Yeah, I thought I just thought it was so cool. I like every single time they do, especially the more like quiet scenes when they do just magic. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I'm always left like, oh man.
Right.
didn't tell me
You know, so I'll admit, just between us,
that.
sometimes when I'm outside at night and the moon is clear, for sometimes I do, I'll just like,
Yeah,
no,
like
it doesn't work.
no, and I loved and then I think that's also why I really liked Sophia because she was
Mhm,
doing a type of magic that like I love, you know?
mhm,
And like I'm like, well, the moon's not answering, but maybe like
yeah,
maybe this one. So yeah, so I that was it's I loved it. I can talk about your magic system for ages, but like that's not. But I loved it.
thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I okay, so the other thing I want to talk about with your writing is the sense of nobody being able to catch a break.
Yeah,
And I
so
want to know
sorry.
like how do you I guess and this is coming from somebody who is wanting to be a writer and whenever I write in my head it feels like such high stakes but when I put it down it's not translating sometimes. And I want to know how do you make it so that you are constantly feeling like your characters are like sometimes I would have to read faster because I'd be like, oh, what's happening,
Mhm,
So how do you get that feeling when you're writing of
mhm.
that intense feeling?
Yes, very good question. So also too, I love craft questions, so thank you. um, so also too, I want to say if anybody listening, if you're a writer, check out my website, tjbentonwalker.com. There is a document on there called the Novel Planning Kit that will help you with planning and plotting your novel from concept to outline. And it is what I use for planning all my current novels. And it is a collection of all of the exercises that I pulled together through all of my 8 years and 7 manuscripts of research and fighting through the query trenches to get signed with my agent. And I created that document as a free resource for writers because a lot of the reason why it takes us so long, especially marginalized writers, to get into the publishing industry is a lack of knowledge and resources. So that's a collection of everything that I had to cobble together over 8 years. It's the best of the best from my perspective.
No, I'm glad you
Yeah.
pointed out because I did actually was going to ask you about it at some point. So I'm
Yeah.
so glad you pointed out because it's a very good resource and I'm
Yeah.
very glad it's like available.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's available to my website. It will always be free. I update it from time to time when I come up with new stuff or like new methodologies. I will add it to the planning kit. So just check back my website regularly and make sure you have the latest version. But there is an exercise in there called Character Dossier. And I actually created that exercise while I was working on Blood Debts with my agent because she told me that Chris's character in the original version was known as Clem. And she actually suggested that I cut Chris and just have the story focused on Clem. And I was like, no, like, this is her story too. And so I was like, well, let me fix it. And I went and I got a couple of craft books on how to build it's like nuanced and rich characters. And I read through them, I studied them, and I took some of the stuff that made the most sense that like really resonated with me. And I created this character dossier exercise, and it's 2 pages of it's two little worksheets, and it just asks you questions about each character, and it just forces you to think about them on a very deep personal level that helps you get to know them better. And if you know them better, then you will do a better job of writing from their POV. So my advice would be check out the character dossier and make sure that like you take the time to develop a well-rounded character that you feel like you would know what they would do in any situation. And you always want to put them in situations where they're having to make a decision to move forward. And even if they don't want to make the decision or they're avoiding making the decision, put them in a predicament where they have no choice but to make the decision. And then also time pressure. Time pressure is always good. The longer you delay, the higher the stakes become when you're avoiding the call to adventure, so to speak. And also, too, one thing that I do to keep the ball rolling for like the plot and the story is also whenever a character has to make a decision, I always ask myself, now, what is the worst possible thing that could happen to this person because of this decision?
Yeah.
And 98% of the time,
That's what you make it happen.
that's the option I choose.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and you continue on that way. But like the first step is making sure your characters are like well-rounded and feel like whole people, and then they immediately will become interesting enough to drive that story.
Yeah. That's like okay. I'm gonna have to, because I did have your document, but I haven't had time to like apply it
Mhm.
myself.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to do that.
so I'm curious. So like try the character dossier and then try it again and see if it makes a difference. And let me know. I'm curious if it'll work for you. But I
Me
think it will.
too. Me too. Because I wanna get to the meaty part of the story, but I feel
Mhm,
like I'm not quite catching something, and so you
mhm,
know what I mean. So I'm like, I can't get there yet because I'm not
mhm.
there. Um,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna,
Also, too, like a good piece of advice that so my best friend Adam Sass, who is also an author. If you have not read him, his work is amazing. He's the author of Surrender Your Sons, Your Lolly Nights Are Over, 99 Boyfriends of Micah Summers, and Cursed Boys and Broken Hearts. But he always tells me when you feel stuck in a manuscript, and this isn't his original quote. He comes somewhere, but I'm old enough to find it, so I don't remember where. But ask him. But he always tells me when you get stuck in a story, it's because somewhere along the way you've lied to yourself about something and you can't move forward until you fix it. So I would also ask you that question. Go back and look to what happened prior to the point where you got stuck and just see if you might have lied to yourself about something. That's why you're stuck. Also, to do the character dossier too. If you do
yeah,
the character dossier, you understand the character better. When you go back and read and you know her better, he or she or they, whoever they are, will tell you
yeah.
what you lied about, and then you'll know immediately to fix it.
Oh my god. I'm like having like a panic like when you pull up my document right. Um so okay, well I will. And I'll DM you about it.
Yeah,
And see what
yeah.
happens.
Let me know because now I'm invested.
Yeah.
Now I want to know.
That was actually my plan all along.
Mhm. Yeah, well, they're always open to you. So just hop in my DMs anytime.
Thank you. I did want to have one last question with well honestly there's so many questions with your writing that I wanted to do like to ask you, but I did one thing that I find interesting is that you write Chris and Clem in first person. You write the other POVs in third. And I want to know about that decision for you.
And the reason that I did that is um, because even though we have multiple POVs in the series, Chris and Clem will always be the heart of the story. They will always be the main protagonists. And I always want readers to be very close to them. And first person present is about as close as you can be to a fictional character. And I purposely wrote everybody else in third person past because I wanted to create that distance. Because I, unfortunately, characterization is one of my strong suits, but it is also one of my weaknesses because I tend to humanize my villains too much.
If it makes you feel better, you didn't fully win me over with Valentina.
Mhm.
So,
Yes. It's because my editor told me like at the start of Blood Justice, she was like, "Now listen," because like, because she saw my outline and like it's I love our process to
yeah.
of creating together because I will send her like my outline and I'll tell her what I want to do with the book and we will step through it chapter by chapter and I will tell her the story and like we'll talk about it and she'll give me live feedback before I ever start drafting and
Oh, nice.
it's wonderful. Like I love working with her. Um, it's Allie Fisher at Macmillan and Tor, by the way. But when we started, she told me, "Now, Terry, you write characters really well. Like these are villains, especially Valentina and Zach. Like, don't humanize them too much. They're still villains. I was like,
Yeah.
right.
No,
I
I
think
think
almost.
for me it worked because
Mhm.
I don't like a villain that is just a villain to be a villain. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Uh,
That's no fun.
yeah, like I want a villain that you can humanize. And that
Mhm,
doesn't mean that they're not still a villain. It just means that like you have a bigger
mhm.
understanding of how I think what I like about it is the tragedy of seeing how this could have been different.
Yes.
And that's what I like
Mhm,
about it.
mhm. Precisely. And I love a good villain.
Yeah.
And Cersei Lannister from Game of Thrones is my all-time favorite villain. And Valentina is inspired by Cersei. And one thing that I love about Cersei is she was always like she could. So I love when a villain makes points, right?
Hmm.
Cersei was never making a point for the greater good. Like she was just evil,
Yeah.
right? She was just evil and selfish, and she didn't care.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
also at the same time, I respected that, and I respected her as a character because I understood why she was the way she was and what motivated and what drove her, and that made her so interesting to me. So I will write villains, like I will write the nastiest villains, but I will always tell you like how we got here because I just
Hmm.
think that's so interesting too. And it's also so real because I don't feel like people are like all good or all bad. I
No.
feel like we're all just like a mixture of everything, and we every day we choose to we make decisions. Some of our decisions are great, and some of them are not so great.
Casual. Yeah, no, I agree. I think we're all shades of gray, and just some of us have a little different shades. Yeah, a little different. Oh God, I could really talk about your writing for ages, but
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and move on to our last section, which is the funsies. That's actually not the name, but we're just that's not the name of this section.
Okay.
But we're gonna continue. Okay, so random questions. I guess one is, do you have advice, the favorite advice that you like to give other writers?
Okay.
What?
At, at first, I thought you said, first I thought you said, "Do you have advice?" And I was going to say, "Oh, do I?"
I mean, do
And then
you?
I,
You can say
then,
that too. Like that's
yeah,
fine.
no, no, no. And then I thought you said, "What is your favorite advice?" And I was like, I wasn't aware we were going there on this show. No, I'm kidding.
We can
No, 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 no.
another show.
We'll stick to the original question.
That's I blame my accent in this.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. We'll have that conversation in the DMs. um, but so I'm the type of person where like I'm always running my mouth and I'm always like telling stories and giving advice. So this answer literally changes based on the day of the week, the time of the day, and like which direction the wind is blowing. But right now, that advice would be the only way you will ever not achieve your dream is if you give up. And I'm speaking from personal experience. It took me 8 years and seven different manuscripts before I signed with my agent. And there were many times on that journey that I wanted to give up. And looking back now, I'm so glad that I did not give up on myself. And I know things have been really, really tough, particularly in the past couple of years in the publishing industry and also in the query trenches. And I know a lot of um, more junior writers are feeling, just kind of just like down about their chances of getting an agent, their chances of ever being published, especially if you're marginalized, right? Um, But I always tell people, like even my career, like my career is not perfect, but I love everything that I have been able to do. And I have a wonderful team of publishing folks that I work with, from my agent to my team at Penguin Random House that I work on the Alex Y series with, and then my team at Macmillan and Tor that I work on the Blood Debt series and Like I Dies First with. And it's been a lot for me to have the opportunity to get to work with them, because they have shown me that I am valued as a creator, and they have shown that they genuinely care about my stories, they care about my career, and they care about me. And I know right now that we're in a space where, especially a lot of us marginalized folks, feel like nobody cares about us. So if you're out there, you're feeling discouraged, you can look to me. I'm here. Everything is not rainbows and unicorns. Sometimes I've been fighting for my life, but I'm here. So the only way it won't happen for you is if you give up. But you can be here. There's a space for you here, and there are people that want you here, from peers all the way up to gatekeepers and beyond. So
That was that's really lovely. Honestly, that was very lovely.
thank you.
Thank you for that answer. Um, I also want to ask you about your love of horror.
Yes. Let's get into it.
No, well, I guess for your series, I guess. Okay, what do you think is the most horror element you brought to Blood Debt?
So for Blood Debts, the most horror scene that you will read is occurs towards the end,
Okay.
when Clem and Jean Louise are at the warehouse with the cadavers. Um, that is one of my most favorite scenes for so many reasons, because like it's scary, but it's also like a really tender moment
Yeah.
for Clem and John Louise. It's like one of my favorite moments from the whole book. Um, and Blood Justice is an onslaught of horror. Um, but if I had to think, there are two scenes that really, really stand out to me as some of my favorites. The first being a scene from Valentina's perspective in the very beginning, when she does necromancy
Oh
with
yeah.
unexpected. I loved writing that scene.
I was Sophia in that moment. I want you to know.
What?
I was Sophia in that moment.
It's
Out of here.
like, what are we doing?
Let's not and say we did. How about that? Like,
You were listening to the audiobook too, right?
no, no, no. I was reading
Yeah.
it. I cursed my imagination. I have a
Uh-huh.
really good one, and so I
What?
pictured the whole
You
thing, and I was scared. I was reading
okay.
it at night like an idiot.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Also, it's partially my fault, because like you didn't know it was that type of party.
no,
You didn't know
I
I was
didn't
going there.
know. I didn't know it was going there. I didn't know. I didn't know that I needed to turn on every light in my house
Mhm.
before I read certain scenes. Like,
Sorry.
I
No.
didn't know that I would need an emotional support person next to me. Like,
Sorry.
that was a good one. That was a good one.
But however, on the you should listen to the if you have access to the audio, listen to the audio, because Bonnie Turpin does Valentina. So
Hmm.
Bonnie Turpin does Valentina, Zeno Robinson does Clem, Janice Abbott Pratt does Chris, and Torian Brackett does Vat Kingston and the interstitials. And Bonnie did such an amazing job with that scene. It is one of my favorite performances of hers from like everything she's done far in the series. So if you also, but however, fair warning, if you're scary, like the way that she acts that scene, it is scary. Like hearing it, because like she does the voices and everything, and it's so atmospheric and it's so good. Um, so there's
I
that
feel like
scene.
I'm gonna regret it, but I might actually look it up.
You should. You should. And the only other scene is the one towards the end, and I can't give details because it's spoilery. But when I say body horror
Yeah, no, I know. I know.
and Jack,
No, I know. That was that was a scene that I read.
Mhm.
That was a scene that I read. Yes. Yes. That was
And
frightening.
like I don't even know, I don't even know where that came from. I because I always knew we were going down that road in terms of like what was specifically happening, but I hadn't really planned out the physics of it until I was in the moment. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was kind of off the cuff, but I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Enjoy is not the word. I think you need to read more rom-coms in your just a suggestion. Casual. No, yeah, no, I'm not. I'm just not very good. I'm just not. I remember being like a kid and being like hanging out with friends and like a sleepover.
Like,
They were like, "Let's watch The Ring," and I didn't know what it was. And and then so it started, and then I realized what it was, but then I was
yeah,
stuck because I couldn't leave because then I was gonna be by myself, and I was
yeah,
too scared. But then I had to stay, which meant that I had to see The Ring, and it took me. It actually took me several years of to get over it.
yeah.
Years.
I can understand that because like that was a tough one to go in cold.
Yes, yes. Somebody
That movie
warned
was
me.
scary.
That one was like that. I couldn't sleep facing away from my TV for years afterward. Like years.
Oh my
I
god.
couldn't. Like it.
Mhm.
I,
Yeah.
no, it affected me. It
Mhm.
affected me. Anyway, moving on. Moving on. Before I start thinking about it, now I have nightmares again.
Sorry.
It's okay. Okay, so we're gonna do a quick rapid fire. Ready?
Yeah.
Chris or Clem?
Clem.
Okay, Valentina, yeah or nay?
Yay.
Would you use necromancy?
Yes.
Fave part about Gen Magic?
Power.
Favorite horror book?
Ooh. Your lonely nights are over by Adam Class.
Okay, your handle on IG is ice cream vice. So what's your favorite ice cream?
My favorite ice cream, very specific. I'm a man of certain tastes. Is the Bluebell Great Divide, and it's half homemade vanilla and half Dutch chocolate
Hmm.
ice. It's amazing. Yeah.
You know mine, and mine is
Yeah.
wild. Mine is Publix brand for those who live in the South. Uh,
Mhm.
Publix. It is called Chocolate Trinity. It's chocolate ice cream that has chunks of chocolate fudge and little cups of chocolate that when you bite into it melt out chocolate.
I remember you telling me about that
Oh
last time
yes.
we talked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wait, I gotta try that.
Yeah.
I gotta
Chocolate
try it.
Trinity, Publix.
Mhm.
Amazing. Best ice cream. Do and I told
Yeah.
you before, do not eat it with people you're not comfortable with. This is not
Because it's
it's not
messy.
a pretty sight.
Okay.
Okay,
Gotcha.
continuing on rapid fire that I derailed us on. Um, what are you
Mhm.
reading right now?
Right now, I am reading Hannibal by Thomas Harris. Yeah.
Okay.
There's a very, very specific reason why I'm reading that book. It was recommended by Adam
Okay.
because I'm working on an adult psychological horror right now, and it's my first full-length horror novel. And I've kind of been like reading a lot of adult horror and adult thrillers and suspense just to get in the mindset of that. I was telling him about that, and he suggested that book, and he was just telling me about how much he loved it. And I have to admit, it's really good. Have
No.
you read it? it um so like it depends on like how squeamish you are about cannibalism because you know like Hannibal Lecter's in it. But just like the way like I can really appreciate the way Thomas Harris writes and the way that he writes his characters and like the prose on a sentence level is just it's so enthralling and engaging and the narrator and I feel bad because I shouldn't plug it if I can't remember remember his name but the narrator whoever you are that narrates the Hannibal by Thomas Harris you did a fucking phenomenal job. It's very good. um and it's I'm really enjoying it. I like reading books that like force me to think about craft and just like revisit how I write. And
Mhm.
that's one of those books.
I would read it, but I think I'd be terrified.
Yeah.
So maybe not.
it's it's very unsettling.
Yeah,
But it's
going
good.
back to the rom-com idea. Like, okay, okay. Top three books that you recommend.
Top three books I recommend. First is We Deserve Monuments by Jazz Hammond. My like I love that book. I will love that book forever. Jazz is also a dear friend of mine. I love them to death. I absolutely adore their writing. Everything that they write, like that. Their other book, Thirsty, is also phenomenal. But We Deserve Monuments is favorite. And Surrender Your Sons by Adam Sass. That was the very first book that he published, and it was absolutely amazing. And The Bruising of Kilwa by Nassim Jamia. That is a amazing novella. It came out from Techion Press, and I believe was it 2022 or 2023. It's relatively recent. Um, it's amazing. It's very good. It's adult fantasy, and yeah, definitely worthwhile. And I remember when I read it, I messaged Nassim and I was telling them about how much I loved it because it reminded me of when I was a kid and I would go to the library all the time and I was constantly where I shouldn't have been. And I was like in the adult section, like pulling out novellas and stuff. And I would always find like these really interesting novellas that I'd never heard of before. And I would just get completely sucked in. And it was so interesting to me. You would have just such a small book
Hmm.
and it was like it would be such a niche topic, but it was so enthralling that it felt like I was reading like a 1,000-page fantasy tome. But it was just it was magic, right?
Hmm.
And reading that book took me back to that magic of my childhood and discovering like this adult novella that just temporarily transported me to this world that I couldn't stop thinking about. Yeah, Bruising a Kill Wild by Nassim Jamia. It's really good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, one last little thing. I want to start doing this thing, so I'm going to start it with you. Um,
Okay.
and so I would love if you could ask whomever I am interviewing next a question.
And it's another author,
It's another author.
right?
I'm not sure who it is yet, but it's another author.
If you could change one thing about the publishing industry, what would you change and why?
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good one. I'm gonna enjoy hearing that answer.
Yeah.
But what is your answer?
I would say if I could change anything about the publishing industry, I would change the business relationship between the author and the publisher. And I would like we should pierce the veil a little bit and allow authors to partner a little bit more with publishers and have more visibility to our individual P&Ls and also to them to pay us a little bit more money so we won't have to write so many books.
Yeah, yeah. As somebody who's not in the industry yet, yeah, I agree. All right, Terry, please let us know what is next for you. What can we
Yes.
expect?
So the next thing that you can expect from me is the finale of the Alex Wise trilogy, which is called Alex Wise versus the Gods of Apocalypse. And that one's really special. It's the end of our apocalypse adventure with Alex and Liam and Lauren. And that one's really bittersweet, right? Because I'm so happy that I get to end the series the way that I've ended it. And I'm so in love with the ending that I gave them. But I'm also going to miss them. But I'm also too happy that now the trilogy will soon be complete and and adults, because adults can read it too. But people who find this series will find it complete and you can read from beginning to end and you won't have to wait. And the next thing that is coming for me is an adult romantic science fiction fantasy that is inspired by The Last Unicorn. And I'm really excited about it. I can't talk too much about it because it hasn't been announced yet. So I can't give you title, I can't give you all of the plot details, but just know it is a second world fantasy. There's dragons, there's a science fiction fantasy mashup. It is a black gay love story, and I am so in love with it, and I cannot wait to share it with everyone, especially you, Stephanie,
Yes,
because I know you're gonna love
yes,
it.
yes, absolutely. That's right up my alley. Terry J. Benton Walker, thank you so much for being here. I loved, loved, loved your books so much. It was such a joy to read them, and it's been such a joy to talk to you about them. And I'm so glad that just I randomly got to hear about you, and it, like how lovely. Honestly, thank you so much for being with me
Yeah,
today.
of course. This was so much fun, and I'm so glad we did it. Anytime that you want me to come back, the answer is always yes. So again, thank you. Also, too, like I appreciate you reading and engaging the way that you have, and this was one of my favorite interviews. So I, I love what you're doing, and thank you for
Thank
having me.
That means so much to me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it a lot because I try really hard to make it both fun, but I really want to talk about the craft because that's my favorite
Mhm.
part. So thank you for hanging out with me for an hour and a half.
It didn't feel like it.
Oh, good. Good. I'm glad.
Yeah,
I'm
no.
glad. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Terry, and thank you everyone out there for watching. This has been the Nerd Tea. See you later.